Hello, and welcome to another TMRN, Time Monk Radio Network production. I'm McLaren, and today is Thursday, December 22nd, 2011. The Time Monk Radio Network administrator and executive producer is Fox, and today he will be doing the recording and technical support of the show. Several members of the TMRN forum are joining us for today's discussion. They include members Jules, Lenny, Green Meadow, Gemini, and Uranus Rising. Like all our interviews, this one will be available on YouTube for free at the Time Monk Radio channel and at the website webbotforum.com. In this program, we will explore the Thrive movie that was recently released and the website thrivemovement.com. The movie brings up many issues and problems hindering humanity. There are seemingly disconnected organizations, challenges, and a system as it exists that doesn't serve the masses of the Earth's population today. The movie and the website propose changing the system to benefit the masses of humanity instead of a very small subset thereof, the global elite. The systems and elements that maintain and reinforce power and control for the benefit of the elite range from money creation and energy production to food, water, and healthcare delivery, and from governance and justice to information and media domination. This interlocking grid creates structures that prevent dissent, reinforce control, and further the agenda of these elite. The movie and website also suggest that there are solutions available that humanity can and should avail themselves of, to redirect those benefits away from the elite and to take back our future for our own benefit. The Thrive movie packages up many of these challenges and questions. It presents the viewer, for the majority of its runtime, with images and success stories of the elite and how they have neatly sewn up the control and wealth extraction system. Near the end of the film, it shifts to show how people are fighting back against the system, encourages the viewer to become involved in changing the system. Suggestions are provided that there are solutions and that you will find them on the website. Moreover, you are encouraged to join mass actions to liberate yourself and other humans from the enslavement by the elite. If you are awake and or have taken a red pill, you're probably asking, why was the movie produced? What is its purpose, as this information was already available? And does it have an agenda other than what it claims? Today, the TMRN Roundtable speaks with Foster and Kimberly Gamble about Thrive and hope to gain clarity and a deeper understanding of the movie, the website, and more. Foster and Kimberly, welcome to the Time Monk Radio Roundtable.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. It's good to be with you.
We're very happy to have you with us today. Today's roundtable discussion questions have been broken into a number of topic areas, the first of which is intent and background, so that our audience can get a better understanding of what is it that the Thrive movie intends. So, Foster and Kimberly, can you explain the rationale, impetus, intent, and goal of Thrive? And by that, I mean, what is the intent in forming the release of the information in this form, and who is it that you're trying to reach, and with what kind of response?
Well, I'll jump in to start. I tend to be more of the comprehensivist, and Kimberly tends to be more of the nitty-gritty activist executive. So oftentimes we'll handle those different parts of a response. And when we together originally created Clear Compass Media, the purpose or the mission of Clear Compass Media was to create compelling media that assists humanity in thriving through the evolutionary challenges threatening our survival. So that was our general and ongoing mission. And then specifically with Thrive, we wanted to connect the dots for people in a way that we hadn't seen done previously. We've seen a lot of wonderful documentaries and books and programs and so forth that do a great job of exposing what's really going on in different areas. And what we were trying to do was to tie the story together within 2 hours at a level that people could see topics which by themselves might seem really strange or far out or literally incredible, But when seen as part of a puzzle, when you back up and look how the pieces fit together, the story ends up making much more sense than what we're being told in our corporate media and in our schools. So I think I'll turn it over to Kimberly with that to expound on it a little.
Yeah, I would say my answer to that about our intent is that, really one of the things was just Foster and I trying to figure out what would be the most helpful thing we could imagine doing, given our, love of people and the planet and our deep concern for what was going on and our unusual and unique position of being able to take our time to do the research and create something like Thrive. So it was really what could be the most empowering, liberating thing that we could possibly do. And we knew that we wanted to use the media. And for me, as much of my goal being to have the coherence, it was also to have something with a different tone than was typically out there in the great information, but that wasn't really helpful for me to share with my friends. Like, I have great appreciation for the work that's gone on before, and like, Endgame or something like that has very important information, and yet the tone of it I found that especially my women friends just really didn't relate to, and that it wasn't getting across to people who weren't already somewhat informed. And I wanted to create a tool that had a tone that would be more easily accessed by people who weren't already informed or convinced. So I'd say it had to do with using the media to have a broad outreach fast. So we went global, we went 10 languages and on the internet right off the bat, rather than trying to do a theatrical release or festivals or that kind of thing. It was to get the toothpaste out of the tube as quickly as we could. And so that was my intent.
Oh, also you asked about the response. We'll share a little bit. The response we're getting so far is so heartwarming and hopeful for us because, first of all, over 1 million people have already seen Thrive within the first month. And so obviously people are not only watching it and letting it in, but sharing it with the people that they love and trust in their networks. And that's really what we were hoping for. We were expecting a fair amount of resistance and turmoil around the information because for people who are not familiar with it, it's so challenging and so painful to really consider. And we're hardly getting any of that at all. People fundamentally are just saying, thank you for putting it together for us in a way that we could let in and where you've done the fact-checking and you've got various experts who are telling a part of the story. And not only is the story coherent, but you're telling it in the light of grounded solutions that can move us beyond that. So already there have been over 2,000 self-created home and public screenings, just sourced by people all over the world who decided it was a really important thing that they wanted to share with their friends or community, and so they've created an event and got a hold of a DVD or rented it online and are showing it to their friends. And so I would say we're probably around 98% really rave reviews, and the ones that are not are mostly like on the web. As we expected, there are debunking sites which don't actually go after the information in the film, but more try to claim that I'm some Illuminati corporate shill or there must be some hidden agenda behind what we've spent our entire lives doing. And even that's fading out. That was more around the trailer when speculation was a lot easier. But now that people can see what the film really is and what the website really is and who we really are, even that's fading out. So we're just thrilled at the response, and it's just beginning to kick in foreign countries even more as we're getting the right DVD formats and so forth for Europe and Asia and so on.
Terrific. So it sounds like...
I could say one other quick thing, which is that
Sure.
we really chose to do the website and the movie together. And that was really an important part of how we went at this, because we really have seen the film as a trailer for the website, because what Foster said about the self-creating screenings, really our whole intention was to provide something that would be helpful for people to then take into their lives and their organizations and their movements, to be empowered by it, and that's where the website comes in. So it really was it's a double offering there, with the film leading people to the website where you could explore for a year, I'm sure, just with all of the archived information that we used and that the people who are in the movie used, as well as the success stories to, have people see how many wonderful people there are doing great things in response to what's going on. So I just wanted to mention that it's really the website and the movie that are part of our offering.
Yes, absolutely. No, the website is integral to people being able to go and explore. Kind of a sideline question. Have you received any feedback from the non-worldwide average person audience? Have you heard anything from the elite or those who might be construed to be members of the elite in terms of why are you doing this and what are you doing?
I would say that we haven't encountered any resistance from the people that we name as being consciously perpetrating the global domination agenda. I'm happy to say that we have had several people reach out to us already to ask for meetings from both the Rothschild and Rockefeller families, members of the younger generations who have acknowledged that the things that we're saying are true, about what some members of their families have done in the past, and that they don't feel good about it, and that they want to help change that legacy. We're very excited about having think tanks with some of these people in the future and really collaborating to see how we can kind of start turning that giant financial ship and aligning it with integrity and natural principles to really restore a planet where everybody can thrive.
My vision, I'll just chime in for that, is that when we do meet with them, that we would film it and have it just be a completely transparent conversation that goes up on YouTube, so that this possibility of the younger generation of people from these families, if this is true, that it can be, part of just transparent to everybody to participate in, unlike how this whole agenda has been carried out, which is so secretive, obviously.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We'll now turn to the topic area of symbology, something I'm sure that you've already had questions come at you about. And for the first question in this area, we'll turn to Lenny.
I have a question from our forum member, Chipper Dog. The question is, one of the most difficult things to get a grasp on, for myself anyway, is to determine the intent behind the symbols that litter the landscape of the human experience. Some of them are the oldest representations of the human attempt to place ourselves in relationship to the universe and the environments we inhabit. They are usually multiple meanings with clades of meaning embedded in these symbols. Various groupings of people over time will take, adapt, enhance, and repurpose these representations of the psyche that we develop and live through. Can you discuss the nature of the symbology that is throughout your movie, from both exoteric, external, and esoteric or internal aspect? And will you relate your understanding of the meanings inherent to, grafted on, and in support of, or in opposition to, the overt message that you are attempting to communicate?
Well, I really appreciate that question on a lot of levels. First of all, I love symbols, particularly geometric ones, and it gives us an opportunity to address some of the most popular kind of debunking speculation that is going on the website, particularly around the all-seeing eye that some people are seeing in our poster, and our choice of the 11/11/11 date to come out. So first of all, in terms of the all-seeing eye, I can honestly say no one on the team ever saw that in the poster until some people started commenting on it. And we literally went back to our poster and go, oh my gosh, I can see how there's kind of a triangle there, and there is one eye. But what we had wanted was to represent humanity waking up, and particularly disenfranchised humanity waking up to what's really going on. So we had talked to our people who were putting together the photographic sessions and putting together the art for the poster, and we wanted a woman of color to represent two huge disenfranchised factions as being empowered and waking up. And so we asked for a woman of color who was taking off a blindfold that had been put on her. And we loved the picture, and we loved the poster, and we probably would have rethought it if we had realized that someone would construe that as the all-seeing eye, because it was absolutely not intended. Now that it is there, I mean, it's been somewhat of a distraction. At the same time, it's gotten a lot of people, invigorated into a conversation. And given that it's there already, I like to see it as it's actually a new version of the all-seeing eye, where even the disenfranchised on the planet are now grasping their own power and waking up and standing up for their lives. So that's our truth about the all-seeing eye aspect of the poster. In terms of the date that we came out on, Kimberly, as the CEO of the corporation, was really producing, managing all of the teams, and she asked all of the teams to tell her by when they would be ready to get the film out. Actually, Kimberly, you know this better than I do, so why don't you go ahead and tell the story of how we ended up on that date.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if this is the question. I heard it more having to do with the movie than the release, but I'll finish the answer that, when the team, so as producer, I just said, let's figure out when we can get this out. Of course, we were always in a hurry to have it released, and everybody came back and said November 18th. They thought they could get it out by November 18th, and we looked and said, oh, that's too close to the holidays. We should release it before that. Could you do it 1 week before? And everybody said, yeah, we think we could do it within a week before that, and we looked, and that was 11/11. It's like, oh, great, what a perfect day for it. So it hadn't really been any more profound than that's when we thought we could get it out, and that it was a great day to have a release. And of course, there's all kinds of, awareness about it and other things going on. So it seemed to go well with that. That hadn't been our initial intention. But in terms of the symbology throughout the movie, and that's what I heard that the question was more about. I don't know if you want to speak to that a little bit, Foster. Or
sure. Yeah, I was getting to that. Obviously, I have been very enthralled with geometry most of my life, and it's not the 2D plane geometry logic course that we're taught in high school so much as how does nature construct what we call reality. That's what's always fascinated me. So my lifelong quest led to certain core geometries on which the periodic table of elements and the electromagnetic field of the body and the galaxy and so forth are built. And symbols of that are throughout the film, some very overt. When you see the torus over what we call the hologram projector at the center of our navigator, and we're really looking to encourage people to see this fundamental torus pattern that sustains healthy systems at every scale throughout the universe. And as different toroidal systems, particularly in the forms of atoms and molecules and cells and so forth, as they begin to combine, they combine in a logical progression of geometry that reveals what Bucky Fuller called the vector equilibrium, and also the more complex flower of life and so forth. So we had fun putting those kind of as wallpaper. If somebody slows down the film as they go through the various wormholes, you'll see that it's kind of wallpapered with moving animations of what we consider to be the core geometries that we're all made of. So we wanted to embed that sense of the resonant fields, the resonant shapes of which we're made, but there was no intention to subliminally manipulate, nor is there any deep esoteric, hidden meaning of any kind of secret society or hidden coercion involved in that, but more just a celebration of the glorious shapes that we're made of and that we're surrounded by in daily life.
Well, thank you. That's a really wonderful explanation, and I'm glad you got a chance to get your message across with that.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Lenny. Jules also has a question on this topic area.
Yeah, thank you, McLaren. Thanks for your answer, Foster and Kim. It's very important that we clarify this because there are a lot of questions out there. Obviously, there are different symbols and there are different levels of symbols. And I think one of the level of symbols people talk about is your use of 12 in terms of the 12 sectors. Obviously, 12 is very esoteric in the world of religion, the 12 disciples of Christ, etc. So the question, I guess, is did you get into developing the actual website itself? How much flexibility or control did you have, and as well into the making of other parts of the the material for Thrive?
Well, that was very central to what we were doing, but not because of any ancient legends or myths or stories, but back to what I was saying before about the fundamental way that nature structures itself. I learned from Buckminster Fuller that it takes 12 vectors to stabilize a center or a hub to a system. So the old English bikes, if you go back before they got really fancy, they always had a minimum of 12 spokes because that's what it takes to stabilize the hub. And that form creates what Bucky called the vector equilibrium. So in the mother geometry, the foundational geometry of any structural system, it always emerges from a hub surrounded by 12 vertices or 12 vectors going from the center out to those vertices. So we were very interested in, when we looked at comprehensively at human endeavor, to try to decide, okay, what is a useful set of titles for sectors of human endeavor that would actually cover the whole scene, the whole reality that we live in. And so we came up with, the obvious of media and education and science and economics and so forth. And we worked with about a dozen other organizations, all of whom were looking to also identify a comprehensive system for human endeavor. And we really did that over a period of several years, coming to final agreement on 12 that seem to work well. Now, obviously, they all overlap with each other. They're all relate as part of an integral whole, but nevertheless, to actually name some particular sectors to look at individually is also really useful. So that was the basis of our using a 12 around one system. I think when we look back and see all of the legends that have the 12 disciples around one and so forth, I think that in my research, those stories are more a way of embodying a fundamental mathematical and geometric understanding than the other way around. So, yes, those numbers and geometry were central to our whole sector navigation system, but based on geometry, not on any particular ancient myth.
Okay, thank you very much.
The next topic area will be on balance and infinite growth. And asking these questions is Green Meadow.
Hi there. I learned about the shape of the torus and the shape of the universe from watching a Nassim Haramein lecture. And he said that he observed that anything that breathes in also breathes out. You have expansion and contraction. Based on that, he decided that the universe cannot just expand, it must also contract. He theorized that there was a black hole at the center of the galaxies where matter is consumed and is born. This was later proved to be true. I think you are using your torus as the basic model of how energy moves. considering the model for the U.S. economy is currently perpetual increasing GDP, how do you apply the Taurus model to economies or monetary systems?
Well, I think that's a really powerful and wonderful question. I think that we're as a culture, we're going to be exploring that one for the next few decades. I appreciate your bringing it up. And let me just share a few reflections. First of all, Nassim is a close friend and someone that I worked hand in hand with for 6 years. It turned out each of us had spent most of our lives coming to very similar but complementary conclusions. So we decided to work together and bring our different models together, see how they're reconciled, and then apply them. And I think he's done a fantastic job, in particularly in the scientific realm, of doing that. In terms of how to apply it for economic systems, a number of ways that the Taurus shows up for me is that, first of all, one of the key points that we're trying to make in the film Thrive is that at the human level, the Taurus, the fundamental Taurus, is the individual, not the group. The group is a secondary concept made up of individuals. But if we consider the group to be somehow senior to or to be more important than the individual, then that ends up justifying violating the rights of the individual. And that has always led to tyranny throughout history, and we're seeing it happen again. So both politically, in terms of social individual rights, the Taurus is fundamental. But then when we look to see how does that influence economics, economics is really just a fancy scientific name for the exchange that goes on between human beings. And if that exchange is voluntary, in other words, if the Taurus field of every person's body, every person's mind, and every person's energy field is honored and not allowed to be violated, then of course exchanges, which is what economics is, will be voluntary. So no one is going to come and take away some of the money that you worked hard to earn. No one is allowed to come and take away your home. No one's allowed to come and rape your body, because we're honoring the wholeness of every individual. So if we honor the wholeness of every individual, then just like the human body is a complex of toroidal interactions, from the atoms to the molecules to the cells to the field around the body, a natural economy, rather than a centralized, controlled state intervention economy, will be based on the fundamental wholeness of each individual's toroidal field. Then in my observation, when that's allowed to happen, because there's a publication that happens every year called the Economic Freedom of the World, and it does surveys all over the world measuring the correlation between hunger, quality of life, and so forth, as related to economic freedom. And consistently, the more economic freedom there is in any area, the more justice there is, the more prosperity there is. So some of the aspects of a healthy economy that we represent in the film as a Taurus, and then contrasted with the tapeworm consuming the Taurus from inside, some of the aspects of a healthy Taurus are what Elizabeth Sahtouris, an evolution biologist who's featured in our film, calls the features of healthy living systems. And one of those features is balance of energy in and out. So in a Taurus, you need to have, in order to sustain the form, you need to have a balance of the energy that's going out with the energy that's going in. And that's what Nassim has identified beyond any physicist that I've previously seen as what sustains a healthy Taurus is not just the radiation, the expanding energy that physicists study, but also the genero-activity, the inward spiral, the life-forming spiral. And you need to have a balance of those two. And, how does that translate? Well, everybody really is running a business. Whether you have an official business or not, you're running your own personal economy. And ultimately, you need to have a sufficient balance of your income with your expenses. You need to take into consideration your costs with your benefits in order to keep your own personal economy in mind. So those are a couple of aspects. Another one is reciprocity. Another is empowerment of all parts. These are qualities of the features of healthy living systems that are also qualities of a healthy toroidal system. And we're just going to be, I think, starting to learn now, what does that mean? What does reciprocity mean? What does empowerment of all parts mean? And in an economy, a regional or a global economy. And fundamentally, I think it's always going to come back to honoring the voluntary exchange of each individual. And then the one last thing I'll say about that is that the whole question of growth is a huge one on the planet right now, because we have the impression that the capitalist system is based on infinite growth and therefore is unsustainable, and it really becomes a cancer on the planet. And I think it's a misunderstanding. I mean, it's a misunderstanding that I think a lot of huge corporations have. But Buckminster Fuller once again pointed out that as we grow in our consciousness, what also grows is what he called ephemerality, which is the ability to do more with less. So if you think of the original IBM computers taking up an entire building and having less power than is now in your iPhone, we've been growing in consciousness and growing in our ability to do more with less. And if you look at energy systems, you look at the difference between the internal combustion engine or nuclear fission and the free energy devices that we depict in the film. Once again, we're learning to do more with less in a clean, healthy way. So I think that just like if you walk out into the woods or you go into a garden, you're going to see infinite growth going on, but in a way that relates harmoniously to its environment. At the same time that the trees and bushes and so forth are growing, there's also natural decay. There's also a natural shrinking once a plant system has reached its boundary, or a species has reached a boundary, the population will start to stabilize. So I think that one of the key things that we need to realize is that we can't stop growth, but it's growth that's natural and appropriate, aligned with natural principles, rather than the sort of runaway destruction of the environment and destruction of people's lives that is a fundamental violation both of ecology and of individual rights. And that's the cancerous type of growth. That's what we need to move away from, but it doesn't mean stopping natural growth.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you just said there. Because like when I look at the human body, we replace our cells every 7 years.
Exactly. Yeah.
Or by 7 years, we've replaced all of our cells. So each cell has at some point died and been replaced. And cancer is when you have cells that don't die. They just keep replicating.
Mm-hmm.
And then the cancer starts taking the nutrients from the body. It takes the glucose and the sugar and all that. And it's starting to feel like, as a society, we're malinvesting. We're investing in the cancer of Wall Street or whatever we want to call it. And the healthy cells are starving. But we don't even have the concept of enough. It's like in this culture, everything is more. Have more stuff, more things. You're not taught to aim for enough. You're taught to aim for more.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just run away. And so that's why I'm thinking that the torus, one of the most brilliant pieces of the torus, is that it has the cycles of decline and expansion, because we've gone insane here.
Yeah. And in the film, Adam Trombley, when he's talking about the free energy device that he and his partner David Farnsworth created, we did the depiction of it as a breathing mechanism, and he describes it really beautifully, because if you're going to harmonize with the ambient energy field in which we all live, you have to be breathing, because that's what the universe is doing in every toroidal system. It's balancing the pulse of the inflow with the outflow, and we see it in our heartbeat, which is a big torus. We see it in our breath, where the lungs are a big torus, but it's also there in the electromagnetic pulse around around our bodies that we can't see, but when it's measured, it also has the kind of pulsation that we measure as as various frequencies. So a lot of what I see coming now is this whole vibrational awareness of how does nature operate, and how can we take a feminine approach of learning to dance with it in harmonic resonance rather than to dominate, control, explode it, which has been, unfortunately, our approach so far. And it's gotten us here, but it threatens all life as we know it now. So we're really at that critical turning point where we have to learn to honor nature's natural flow and align with it if we're going to survive, much less thrive.
So, the film is named Thrive, so you're focused on thriving, which most people tend to think of as expansion. How would you include cycles of decline or stasis or death as part of balance?
For me, thriving is exactly what you said. Thriving is balance. If you're only focused on expansion, pretty soon your system will be burned out. And in fact, some of the first people trying to create free energy devices tried to put them inside a sphere, or tried to put them inside a box, and they would all either freeze or fry because they were either exaggerated in the direction of expansion or contraction. But once they started using toroidal systems, which are open so that they can balance the flow in and out, that's when they started to actually access this infinite energy that's available everywhere in the universe.
Thank you. That's helpful.
And thank you, Green Meadow. We appreciate your questions. Very thoughtful. And Foster and Kimberly, those were very thoughtful answers. We do appreciate it. The movie and website propose solutions to help humanity. The next few questions applicable to this topic area will be posed by Gemini. Gemini?
Thank you, McLaren. This question is from Fox. Why do you think that the system can change from the inside? They have been saying that for years, and yet it only continues to get worse. Not to mention that this seems to be a conflict of interest, and that changing it from the inside will only ensure the entrenched power's place in the whole scheme of it all.
Well, personally, I'm not holding my breath for any major transformation coming from the inside. I think people who are, quote unquote, on the inside have sold out to and depend on the agenda to such a degree that they will be the last ones to respond. Plus, I don't think that's the way nature really works. I think that one of the reasons why we're looking to help facilitate the empowerment of a self-creating global movement is that if it's self-creating, then it's decentralized and it's happening everywhere. It's like sprouts, in a field or something like that. So it can't just be negated or cut off at some central root. It's really happening in people's consciousness as opposed to through some particular personality or some particular organization. So I think that personally that the Occupy movement is a wonderful indication of what's arising around the world now, where people are waking up and getting together without looking for a leader or without looking to affiliate with a particular political party on the usual polarized spectrum or a particular institution, but to actually sit down where everybody is equal, gets an equal voice, and where the discussion is intended for new thinking to emerge that can actually transcend the old system. And once that begins to emerge, which I think is happening all over the world, I think it's happening in Thrive, it's happening in Occupy, it's happening in the Arab Spring, it's happening in publications and media all over the place. And Paul Hawken talks in the film about how there's over 1 million, actually he's saying now it's closer to 2 million organizations worldwide that are not cults of personality, but are self-creating movements for peace, for social justice, and for environmental sustainability. So it's the largest movement in history, and it's really the first global revolution, and I think it's coming up everywhere. It's like scientists now say every point is the center of the universe rather than there's a particular point. And I think that the global emergence is happening the same way, that every individual can be the center of the global emergence if they choose to, and in fact that's the only way that it's going to work, because we can't count on the people who played the political and financial game of old effectively to change that game from the inside, because they're dependent on it. They're trained in it. So I'm looking for a whole new way of transformation rather than a traditional political vote or a party or something like that.
I want to chime in here that I think that, we do so that is our vision, and that's like when we talk about the 3 stages, that we're very much for the decentralized, self-organizing response and creativity. And, the reason that in the top 10 strategies there would be something like campaign finance reform is that in order to get to an honest economic system, we have to get rid of the Federal Reserve. And how do you get rid of the Federal Reserve if you can't? There's a process that's probably going to happen to take them out. And that process is going to require that there be some people in office who are actually carrying out the intention of the people they represent. And as long as they're being paid by the corporations, that can't happen. Now, can we get rid of the Federal Reserve without it being a state process? Yeah, there can be a level of revolution that does that. And we need to be able to empower all kinds of alternatives that can then come in their own self-creating way to see which one's best and how does it go. But that's a really messy and painful process, potentially. So part of it is to say, okay, how are we going to get from here to there? Because the most bold, intelligent, radical ideas for where we need to be often skip sort of the transition between here and there and the number of people who are relying on this particular financial system meanwhile. So that was kind of the balance that we struck in naming this 3-part strategy. Was really a matter of how realistically we can truly have the level of revolution that we need to have while doing as little damage in the process. So I don't think, I know for myself, and I don't think either one of us has any hope that the government system is going to intentionally self-destruct, which is what needs to happen. However, I think that there is this 3-stage strategy that we can engage in that, continues to help take care of those who are most disenfranchised while we dismantle the government. And, that kind of gets more into stage 2 with the real shrinking of the government until it is obsoleted by our working out our voluntary decentralized systems. So it's really, to me, I really appreciate this question because it gets straight to where some of the most difficult part of this process lives, in my opinion, about how do we actually make this happen, starting right now in each of us. And the thing about the Taurus that for me, I think about all the time has to do with the fact that what's most unique is that it's distinct and unified at the same time. So it's actually made out of its environment and at the same time distinct within it, like a whirlpool. And to me, that's the crux of the matter right there. Like in every relationship, whether it's an interpersonal relationship in a couple or in our own relationship in our neighborhoods or groups or families or larger bodies, it's who am I individually and who are we together. And so to me, that really informs this whole process of how are we actually going to get from here to the world that we're talking about. And that's where I would just like to have that part be entered in here in terms of why we would recommend anything having to do from happening from the inside.
Hi, this is Uranus. I just want to jump in with a real quick question. You mentioned, Kimberly, about this messiness and painfulness that we want to really avoid if we're going to get rid of the Fed and these systems. But the thought came to me, isn't messiness and painfulness a necessary part of life? And my big question here is, isn't the fear of this what's keeping the support of the system going?
Probably. I think messy, painful, I experiences are absolutely a part of a part of what's going to be happening and already is happening. And if it happens that the Fed, that we have the way to get rid of the Fed without there being any kind of a process, and you can just move more quickly to a next level, I'm very open to seeing how that can work. I also know that it's really hard to choose who to sacrifice in these kinds of things, and that's sort of what it comes down to also. So, I don't know, Foster, you might know the exact percentage of people, but we just read recently a survey of what number of people depend upon the government, for example. So either because they receive some kind of support from the government, they're employed by the government, or in one way or another. So to say we're going to eliminate that immediately, and, those of you who starve in the process are necessarily going to be sacrificed because that's what has to happen here, that's a hard call to make. And so what I've been looking at is, what's the most radical way we can do it? And I don't think it's one way or another. I think all these movements, combine, and a lot of messy things happen, and it can move a lot faster than we thought. I think it is happening a lot faster than I had initially hoped it would. So I wouldn't say, I don't disagree. I think I can remember as a kid thinking, why don't we just stop this two-party thing? It's not working. Way back then, and thinking, well, if we did that, it would only be worse. People always say that. So I'm with you that that's often used as an excuse, but I also think that there's something in it that we need to pay attention to. So
I'd like to briefly address that too, Uranus, because I really appreciate the question. I think it's absolutely central to the transition that we're needing to create. And I'd like to make a distinction between informed fear and uninformed fear, because I think when we confuse the two, then we're more easily manipulated. And what Kimberly was describing, if you're a single mom of 3 kids and you're a teller at Wells Fargo, you don't want that bank to disappear overnight, until you find a way to land, or if you didn't realize what the Federal Reserve was, but you've been working there, then it's going to take time to make some of these changes. So I think that's a well-informed fear to go, okay, I need to make sure that I take care of myself and my loved ones and my fellow human beings as the system is changing. I think, on the other hand, an uninformed fear is when we just simply haven't been taught, haven't been allowed or encouraged to think certain issues through, like what would the economy be like without a private central bank who gets to print money whenever they want? Or what would our entire culture be like if we did not have a few people in the form of the state who had rights that no one else has to dominate other people's lives and take their stuff? So if we can be indoctrinated to be afraid of being without those forces over us, like we need them to survive, those are kind of our perpetual parental figures, then I think that fear, that kind of nebulous confusion and fear, can be used to herd us, really to shape our behavior rather than have us be free to choose. And I think that's what things like Thrive are dedicated to, just giving people as much information as possible so that we can make informed decisions about what kind of world do we really want to live in, and where does our security come from for real, as opposed to some of the things that we've been taught that may not be true.
Well, I really, really appreciate your answers here and appreciate your thinking. And I also hope that people will come back to their humanity and help each other out as we go through the transition. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm just quickly jumping in along the lines. It's interesting that you mentioned, I guess the gist of what you're saying, Kimberly, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that we're trying to lessen the pain by making it a slow transition. It's transitioning from the Fed to a new system to avoid pain for people. But what I see difficulty in that is that, as you know, of Catherine Austin Fitts, the powers that be sometimes use slow transitions, such as the slow burn, to keep control of the situation. So sometimes it's necessary for the transition to be quick, because then chaos ensues and the powers that be lose control. So what's your opinion on the transition and trying to slow it down?
Well, I'm actually not for a slow transition. In fact, it's funny, around here, like I'm definitely a real revolutionary in this regard, and I'm wanting a complete transformation and support that. And so it's not so much a slow transition as it is that I want to see some real viable alternative currencies and local communities empowered with ways of solving problems all on their own. These things that are that have been going on now for a while, that's what gives me hope. So that if it's a quick change, then there are these. It's sort of what's the best thing on the table that's going to replace it when this chaos happens, because there's as much danger coming out of the chaos if we're not prepared then with the new, self-creating systems that are diverse all over the place, with people saying, okay, we'll try this, we'll try that. Some are going to work better than others, but that's the mess of what needs to evolve. I mean, I'm all for that. It's just that empowering those alternatives is something that that's what we're hoping to do. And in fact, at thrivemovement.com, you can actually get academic credit for helping to create some of these self-empowered communities, or engaging in any of the other solutions that we mentioned, just in order to help inspire, young people to get out of the typical mode and create these alternatives so they will be on the table. So I can't say I'm a proponent of slow change. What I am, though, is trying to be, I guess, to be able to have a plan kind of any way you go. If it goes fast, great, it goes fast. And if it's going to be something that people are taking time with, then I want to be going at it in just as steadfast a way. So
I'd also add to that a quality of slowness that I think aligns with naturalness. And in that sense, it's slow rather than being sudden and violent, is the principle that Gandhi and King and others have used of nonviolent non-participation. Because you could do something very quickly by having, the 99% all take up arms and, take over the capital or something like that. Things might happen very quickly, but not organically. And it would be based on a level of violence that would just be more of the same, as has happened in so many revolutions in the past. But with nonviolent non-participation, what happens is that the power of a pyramid is in its base, not in its capstone. So as masses of people wake up to realize how our lives are being destroyed by a dishonest system, we can literally choose to shift our attention, which means to shift our money and shift where we buy, where we invest, shift out of being willing to participate with, sending our children off to wars of aggression and taking our money out of the banks that are destroying so many people's lives and so forth. And as that shift starts to occur, which it is already, it will multiply geometrically. I think the rate at which things will change will surprise everybody, in the same way that the rapidity of the spread of Occupy is virtually unprecedented across the globe. So that's the kind of geometric expansion we're going to see as people get highly leveraged individual actions that they can take in their daily lives that don't take a lot of time and money, that take the support away from these hierarchical organizations of domination and seek out new places to put your money, new places to work, new places to relate to each other that are based fundamentally on integrity and on individual freedom, as opposed to being based on fear and domination and who's got the most money and all of that. And that is in a sense, it's a slow process in that it's a withdrawal rather than a force or coercion. But at the same time, I think it's going to happen so fast because it will be self-reinforcing that people won't experience it as slow compared to what's been going on.
Yes, it'll reach a tipping point.
Yes.
Many thanks.
I'd like to speak one thing into that, the notion of non-participation, because I really think that is at the crux of the matter of the revolution that I'm feeling is most likely going to happen, which is, and I think it's partly coming from the response that we're seeing to Thrive. It's like the number of people who are actually more willing to engage, seemingly, in what I think of as unconflicted behavior. The way, in my experience, what I believe is that if to get from here to where we want to be, it takes a combination of two things, and they have to work together, and it's passionate intent and unconflicted behavior. And, passionate intent is a lot easier to muster than unconflicted behavior, and in fact, figuring out what unconflicted behavior has been a real challenge. And, I know in my own life I used to work to help stop coal and nuclear power projects. And my ritual was every other week we met, and I would, drive across town to these meetings, and on my way I would pull into the conveniently located Bank of America parking lot and deposit my paycheck and then go off to my meetings, because I didn't understand that banks use our deposits to make loans to the corporations so that they can fund their projects. And I didn't understand that Bank of America was actually funding the same corporations I was then driving across town to try to stop. So it doesn't matter how passionately intent I am on stopping those dirty technologies if I'm also funding them at the same time. And I think we've had a lot of passionate intent and people feeling stuff's wrong and all of that without then taking the next step to say, how is my behavior actually undermining what I'm passionately intent upon? And I think that's one of the real blessings of the Occupy movement, and hopefully one of the things that Thrive is helping with also is to help clarify what does unconflicted behavior actually look like on an individual level, because that's to me where it has to happen, that each of us takes some responsibility to stop funding our own demise.
Thank you very much.
That would be wonderful if that could happen, Kimberly. We as a group certainly believe in decentralized actions. Jules and Uranus, thank you, brought up some wonderful questions. But in terms of solutions, Gemini has another one that she'd like to ask.
Thanks, McLaren. This next question is from Green Meadow. While most will agree that the entrenched elite have manipulated our economies, governments, banks, and corporations, the average man has accepted the slow decay of our rights and the value of our dollar. For the most part, this was through ignorance of what was really going on and faith in their governments. But what personal responsibility do people have for the current situation? And is there a need for them to take accountability for this mess to transform as you envision?
Well, I get the image of the frog, in the pot of water that's slowly coming to the boil. It's important, I think, for people to realize how clever this scheme has been that has duped us for so long and gotten us to this point, and to acknowledge that this is not incompetence, it's not stupidity. These are actually very shrewd people who have orchestrated virtually our entire reality, kind of the current matrix, to keep us from actually having the information that we need to even be aware of what to take responsibility for. So I think that those walls are coming down, those curtains are being pulled back, and I think it's going to be only through people taking personal responsibility that the transformation occurs. But it's not like people have to. A lot of times, movements are sort of shaped with sentences like "we must this" and "we have to that," and that's just more coercion. That's telling other people what they have to do. And for us, we are so deeply grounded in and moved by the power and beauty of the human spirit that we're really focused on providing the facts, the tools, and hopefully some persuasive arguments that give people some new ways of looking at things, but not so that people take on our belief system, but so that they do the next level of their own critical thinking. And I think, in my observation, that a vast number of people, I mean most people, even as scared and in debt and dumbed down as so many of us have been by our systems, what I see is the slightest little glimmer of truth and opportunity, and the human spirit just, jumps up and starts dancing. And that's what we're seeing in response to Thrive all over the world. People just saying, I knew it. I knew something was going on. I didn't know what, but now that I feel like I know what's going on, now I'm getting together with my family and my neighbors and in my workplace, and we're already having meetings about what we can do. And for me, it was useful when I read that the American Revolution was enacted only by 5 to 6% of the population. It doesn't take everyone. It's the early adopters, the people who catch on, who are ready to move, who will get the snowball rolling, and others will join in as they can. And then I think ultimately it will be unstoppable because it's true, but because it aligns with the life force, and we're evolving to the next level. So yes, I agree that personal responsibility is at the core of it, but it never needs to be coerced. People will wake up as they can.
Yeah, and your answer really resonates with me. I'm starting to see that in everyday life, snippets of conversation, and people really waking up and paying attention. So that's a great answer.
I think the elite have really underestimated people.
Yes.
Actually, I don't think they understand that they took it too far. And I see it now. Like when we worked on Thrive for 8 years, and when we started, it was, when we were talking about banking to people, they would just glaze over. It was not part of the everyday conversation. And when we were advocating for certain things, it was just so radical. And now, people are absolutely awake to and willing to have that. And certainly it's not it's not like the Democrats are for it and the Republicans aren't or something like that. This is so transpartisan to absolute, knowing that we can't keep doing what we're doing, and that something is really, really wrong, and that there are enough people waking up that there's safety now in waking up. So I do see it happening. I have to say I'm hopeful. I'm definitely
There's another insight from science which fuels me a lot, particularly during low times when I get discouraged at seeing certain behaviors amongst the populace and so forth. When I stop and remember that each one of us on this call and across the planet started out as a sperm looking for an egg, and each one of us was the winner in a swimming race with roughly 300 to 600 million other swimmers, and we won. Each one of us won that race. So that's the level of intention that is there inside even people who are so discouraged, so resigned and don't see a way out. Given the slightest chance, we use the imagery in the movie of those bamboo plants breaking through the concrete. That's what I see happening now all over the world, and it gives me tremendous confidence, too.
Well, that's a great answer. Thanks so much.
And thank you, Gemini. We are speaking with Foster and Kimberly Gamble. You can help to support them by watching their movie, Thrive, What on Earth Will It Take? The movie and more information are available at the website thrivemovement.com. The world is waking up. Continuing our discussion on the solutions topic, we'll now turn to Lenny. Lenny?
Hi. You were talking about how can we make this happen and about electing officials. So my question is, our elected officials have not always served the best interests of our people, and let's assume that the citizens vote corrupt incumbents out of office. But then based on if the votes are counted honestly or fraudulently, the declared winner may not have received the popular vote. And so what do you see happening if corrupt losers with experience are declared the winners, and what non-aggressive action can be taken to address that? And then conversely, what do you see happening if honest, new politicians, inexperienced folk are placed in office?
Sure, we both have answers to that. You want to go first, Foster?
Go ahead.
Well, let's see. I would have to say that I am not hopeful that this political process can do anything without campaign finance reform, the elimination of corporate contributions, and fair voting. So, because I don't think it's even possible to get people who could elect and represent the people. And I'm not I think the whole two-party system is a total sham, and don't participate in voting for Democrats and Republicans at that level myself for that reason. However, on a local basis, it seems to me that people who can make local decisions really have a big impact, and so focusing on that level is where I would personally put my efforts in terms of the political process. Mm-hmm. It's not where I put my greatest hope. It's just that I think that it's probably going to play a role in this transition. And one of the things that I've had to come to terms with is that I think we each have a calling to participate in different ways. And my support of campaign finance reform and fair voting is because I think that if there is going to be a political process in this transition, those two things are prerequisite. It's not personally where I have my passion or put most of my energy, because I'm much more of a grassroots, self-creating kind of revolutionary, I would say.
I'd like to address it at a macro scale for a moment. And that is to say that if we stand back and take a fresh look at government itself, if we are in agreement that nobody should be able to violate each other or take their rightfully gained stuff, then isn't it strange that we turn right around and create a government and give a few people the right to pick up weapons and go and threaten other people and take their stuff, take their money in the form of, like since 1913, the income tax, and then take that money to go out and bail out their cronies from the banks and subsidize the multinational, corporations spreading GMO food and the like, and create wars of aggression to take further other people's stuff. So I think it's critical for everyone, sooner or later, to face the notion that even though we've been entirely raised for centuries in the absolute belief of the necessity of the state, to notice at the same time that the most destructive force in the history of our planet is the state, being responsible, as we say in the movie, for over 200 million deaths in the 21st century alone, and the majority of those were within the boundaries of the state. So it may be that the state itself is rotten at the core. And I think that the core is that it's based on the notion that a majority of people, and that's in the best case of a democracy, that if you had legal voting and properly counted votes and all, that still the majority of people can vote what's ethical to do to other people, potentially in violation of their individual rights. So if the majority gets together and says, well, I don't think women should be able to vote, or I think that blacks should have to ride at the back of the bus, or they should be slaves, or something like that, well, that's democracy. So how's that really working for us? I really acknowledge that it's better than particularly in the first blush of its growth, it's better than socialism, communism, fascism, and so forth. But ultimately, for me, the key distinction that we're missing is between collectivism, this notion that there's a thing called the group which is more important than each person's individual rights, versus the perspective of beginning with honoring everybody's individual sovereignty. So I think it's kind of like hiring a warden of a jail who would actually be willing to put himself out of a job when there are no more people who need to be imprisoned. I would want to see politicians during this stage 1 and 2 who actually understood individual rights enough that they would be willing to, rather than make huge amounts of money in a revolving door, they'd be willing to steward the demise of the very institution of government that they work for. And I think that's rare amongst politicians. I think that there are some people that I have observed and some that I've known along the lines of a Ron Paul or a Dennis Kucinich, who just are human beings of very deep integrity, who believe in the political system enough to have participated in it, but they would be happy to see it go out of business if that meant that people would be more prosperous and and more secure. So I think that the whole notion of ultimately having the sense of an honest politician in the long run is going to be a contradiction in terms. But in the transition stages that we talk about with stages 1 and 2, I think we're looking for the most integrous people that we can find who will restore integrity to the system while shrinking the system at least down to just the stewarding of the commons and the protection of individual rights, rather than the making up of laws and the creation of wars against other nation states and all that type of thing.
And you then would be an agreement that financial reform for election campaigns would be a foundation for making this happen?
Absolutely, yes.
So then we have to figure out how to make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I have another question. Was there anything more in that one that you wanted to say?
Nope.
Okay. Your movie is a call to action for change, but most actions have repercussions, and when Martin Luther King was leading his peaceful protests, he warned that people would be arrested or could be arrested for their activities or have different communities turn against them. So what repercussions do you think people should be aware of as they begin to change themselves and the status quo? And what do you envision people will personally have to change in their lives?
Kimberly, is there anything you must say about that?
Go first, and then I will.
Well, the first things that come to mind for me is the images of those students sitting on the lawn up at UC Davis and sitting there while they and their friends were pepper sprayed. I think about that every day and think to myself, could I have sat there and remained nonviolent while that police officer was putting this toxin substance into the bodies of all of those young people who were just sitting on the lawn? And but at the same time, I watched over the next few days as the modern media, lots of people had their little mobile cameras, and it was up on YouTube within hours, and the whole world got to see and judge that event. And that police officer was laid off, and they had to retrench from some of those kinds of strategies. So it was the same as with Martin Luther King. He was very strategic as much as possible about doing his protests where there were going to be cameras, so that the moral outrage of the traditional behavior was obvious and could influence a lot greater number of people than happened to be there for the event. So that's one of the things that I would observe in terms of what people are going to need to face. And when the Egyptian students needed to take to the streets again, once they realized that leaving the military in power didn't get them the kind of freedoms they were looking for, I think there was something like 37 people killed. It's a very serious and dangerous game, even nonviolent protesting. So that's one whole area where I just can't express enough of my admiration of the courage of these people who are taking the streets to get other people's attention on the issues. And then the second thing I would say is that on a much more personal level, David Icke talks in the film about the importance of each person recognizing the challenge of stepping outside of their own, what he calls the hassle-free zone. When you start talking about a conspiracy, when you start talking about free energy or UFOs, when you even start talking bluntly about liberty, it can be very challenging with your own spouse, with your other family members, with the people at work. And people are going through that now by the hundreds and thousands and millions, really, across the planet, through things like Thrive, which are waking people up to new perspectives as they decide whether or not to bring these topics up with the people who trust them, and as they decide whether or not to give a copy of Thrive to somebody as a Christmas present. It's a big challenge for each one of us to risk our reputation, our credibility, our social relationships, and so forth. And we're each deciding on a daily basis now, okay, what is our priority in terms of comfort and discomfort, in terms of truth versus, illusion or, soft compromises and so forth. So I don't have any absolute definitive answer, but I do know that in my experience, it's consistent that the truth will keep arising, that love is the most powerful force that I've ever seen, and that at our core, that's who human beings are, and we're waking up to that, and that cannot be stopped ultimately.
Yeah, I guess one little thing I want to add to that is that I really think it's important for each of us to know what is true for us. Like for me, I know speaking up, and being one who's been willing to bring up the uncomfortable conversations and be bold in my opinions and outspoken and all of that. Like that's never, well, it's certainly never been comfortable for me. I don't think it's comfortable for most people, and yet for me it's been really important to realize the discomfort of not speaking up or the discomfort of not taking action, whatever it is, whatever part there is, whether you're someone who's going to go be on the streets or, make a film or whatever your own particular part to play in this is. I think that it ultimately just brings us face to face with ourselves, and I know for me it's been a matter of recognizing how much pain and turmoil there is going on all the time right now, so that it's not like we're going to cause pain that isn't actually already happening. It's already a complete mess. So when people want to know, well, what about this or that, it's like we're already in a horrible state for most people on the planet. And then the other part is, for me, I know for both Foster and I, we've thought a lot about like just how well do we sleep at night. That's the bottom line, and that has to do with come to terms with your own sense of integrity and what's called for, and who do you want to be? Who do you want to show up as?
A number of people have said to us, why in the world are you taking all these risks? You guys could just be retired on a beach in Tahiti sipping Mai Tais or something like that. And for us, it's not even a question. The notion of our children and grandchildren and our loved ones and our species going forward on this gorgeous planet in some sort of oppressive police state, if there's something that we can do about that, doing something about that with its inherent risks is so much more of a draw than cowering in fear somewhere, just taking care of ourselves for a few years while knowing that other people are becoming more and more vulnerable. Neither of us would be able to sleep at night or live with ourselves were we to choose that option. So we were blessed to have the privilege of some time and some resources to follow these questions, create a coherent representation of what we found, and then offer it out to other people to try to save them some time.
Well, I can see that you're leading with compassion, and that's really given you the courage to do everything that you've done, and I'm sure many, many, many people really appreciate that. But I'm wondering if you've received any threats or what repercussions have you had that you would be willing to talk about?
Well, I'm thrilled to say that we haven't had a single, we haven't had a single threat. We haven't had anything that I would call hate mail. There are plenty of debunkers, who try to undermine our reputation, but no hate mail or threats at all. I can't guarantee that will continue, but we also tried to be as strategic as we could with our communication and stay completely under the radar until our message was ready to be delivered to the world. And now, as Kimberly said, that toothpaste is out of the tube. And if somebody tries to hassle us at this point, we now have a network of over 1 million people around the world who are very much in support of what we do, and we're connected with them electronically, and we've taken precautions of having all sorts of backup servers and so forth. So it would only validate what we're saying if they were to try to somehow actually harm us at this point. So we
don't
can't
need that validation. I think we're validated.
Yeah, we can't guarantee anything in the future, but it's certainly operating in alignment with our own integrity and with what we perceive to be natural principles is really the only choice for us at this point. In fact, let me tell one quick story that there's a guy that whose work I followed for a while who has interviewed a number of so-called refugees from the Illuminati. And these are anonymous interviews, but you can tell that they're very knowledgeable about what's going on the inside. And again, these people, when they tell their stories, they talk about how the would-be controllers sit around and they've got so much under their control with the media and the money and education and food and all that kind of stuff, but they can't seem to get it all wrapped up. And they keep referring to what they call the X factor, which is no matter how hard they try, no matter how much force or money or deception they use, the X factor keeps popping through, and they're not sure what it is. But if you hear their descriptions of it, it's really love and truth. You know, it's the life force expressing itself, and that's one of the things that gives me confidence, because I know that the people perpetrating this agenda are in great pain, and they're not aligned with the life force. So I know from my experience as a martial artist, and particularly in Aikido, that the true power, the unlimited power, comes from aligning your body, your breath, your emotions, your thinking, and your actions with the life force, not trying to control or suppress it.
I want to say one thing about our strategy with this also, which was really the most dangerous time for us was in the making of the movie, because we specifically chose a release strategy that would, we used to call it getting the toothpaste out of the tube, as we've mentioned a few times, because you just can't put toothpaste back in a tube once it's out, and that was our idea, was to get this thing out globally fast. So as soon as it was out on the internet, we knew that we were safer then than we had ever been, really, because it was to shut us down before we had the base of people understanding what we were doing. So I felt a tremendous release on 11/11 that I hadn't even known I was carrying until it was released, that we made it, that we got that out, and that since then, you know, the conversation's been distracted from the content. You know, people go after our reputations, as Foster said, and slander us, and distract from the content with other issues. But there has been no real intelligent taking apart the content of the movie, and no direct threat to us for doing it. And I think that that's partly because of the safety that we gained by going out so quickly.
Well, I appreciate that. I have another question to ask you, which is your movie and websites. They're an example of using the power of truth that Gandhi spoke of to expose the architects of domination and to initiate the process of bringing integrity to our current situation. On a practical level, what percentage of our population do you feel is needed to reach a critical mass in understanding the history and current actions of the elite, and how we can begin to bring about this change?
I'll address that for a minute, because I've done some research on that, because that was a burning question for me, of what would a tipping point be like statistically. And some key data points for me was, well, I already mentioned that supposedly the American Revolution was 5 to 6%. Ken Wilber, whose work I respect a lot, says that it takes 10%, around 10% of a population adopting a new, more advanced worldview to actually shift the paradigm. And then a friend of ours, Paul Ray, who has been the main researcher behind the statistics around the spread of cultural creatives and that paradigm around the world. In his recent studies, the number of cultural creatives, and for those who are not familiar with that term, it means basically people who are willing to shape their lifestyle around things like social justice and environmental sustainability. The numbers of those people in Europe, Japan, and the United States is now, in all three areas, up around 35%. So combining all of that with the as long as we can keep the internet open and how fast people are getting educated and organized and active, I think we're very close to a tipping point.
Wow. Well, thank you very much.
And now we're going to turn to Jules again for another one of his questions.
Yes, thank you, McLaren. How far down the rabbit hole have you gone? Have you investigated the elite's ritual sacrifices, mind control, and child molestation as exposed by Alex Jones, David Icke, and Kathy O'Brien, which you've talked about in your interviews and on your website? If indeed, as you mentioned in the movie, the elite have a depopulation plan to kill a large portion of us, then what Aikido move do you think is the most effective at this time? And considering the elite's history and their mindset, can we use their energy against them without causing them injury realistically? Or is it going to end not too well?
That's a powerful group of questions. First of all, I have gone down the rabbit hole as far as I could possibly go at this time. I've learned enough to know that there will always be more that I don't know, and that will probably shock me when I find out about it. But yes, I have looked into those areas extensively in terms of ritual sacrifices and child molestation in the secret societies and so forth. And I felt like I needed to kind of find the bottom, to have as full an understanding as I could, and to try to find compassion for the people who are doing this. And that was the bottom of the barrel for me. I mean, it's right there along with, mass genocide, which most of these invasions of countries with, 1 million people dying in Iraq and this type of thing. I mean, it's absolutely horrific, even though it's called, spreading democracy or something like that. The number of innocent deaths is just horrifying. But at the same time, to realize the people who could do that type of thing and then go out for dinner somewhere are very often the same people who are involved in this sort of distorted and destructive behavior on an individual basis behind closed doors. And I spent quite a while not only studying the phenomenon, reading people like Kathy O'Brien and Bryce Taylor and about their experiences, the Franklin cover-up and all of that, but it was helpful for me to actually look into the biographies of a lot of the high-level people who were involved in these things, and to realize that virtually every time, once I got enough information, these were people who were at least highly dominated and intimidated by authority figures in their childhood, if not right out abused, either physically, emotionally, sexually, or all of the above. And that these are people who are truly in deep pain and disassociated from the experience of love and honest feedback from other human beings. And that's what allows for that kind of bizarre behavior. And once I got to that realization, and David Icke was very helpful to me in this, because one of the reasons I interviewed him for the film was that when I read his book, The Biggest Secret, and came to I think it was the last chapter called I Love You, Dr. Kissinger, I just sat and read the title over for about 5 minutes going, what? And I was really impressed by the depth that he had found. And he said he didn't want to publish that book until he could honestly experience love for someone who's done what Henry Kissinger has done to other human beings' lives. And that was an inspiration for me to not hide from the gruesome information, but to find the compassion, find the place inside myself where, but for the grace of my particular path, I might have been that badly distorted any of us could have been. And once I got that, then I realized that my job is not to hate or to try to conquer or kill these people, but to actually operate in compassion with them, obsolete them from their roles of power, make sure that as much as possible they need to participate in a process of truth and true reconciliation about what's gone on, but at the same time to put the emphasis on the liberating of human systems rather than just judgment and vengeance. So it was very useful for me to find the kind of the bottom of the barrel like that, and that has fueled me to not feel like I'm going forward having to resist some aspect of the information.
Yeah, I'll speak for one moment into that also, because I think for me what was key in that understanding was that, we included the depopulation agenda because what we chose in the movie was to do the minimum sufficient understanding that we felt people had to have in order to come up with solutions that are commensurate to the task before us. And that if you don't understand that there is no protection, then you can't look accurately at what's happening. And it came up for us when there was a spray supposedly that was happening across Northern California. We bring it up in the movie, and that happened in our town here, where there was actually Homeland Security and the CDFA and all kinds of institutions involved in spraying an aerial spray over millions of people throughout Northern California to supposedly eradicate an apple moth that wasn't causing the problems that they were purporting. And anyway, if people didn't understand that spray that they were putting actually can kill us and has endocrine disruptors, and that you can't just look at it and go, well, they wouldn't do that, because how you'll mobilize and what you'll do in response to that as people protecting our families and our lives is very different once you're aware of how far they'll go. So we chose to kind of go to the minimum sufficient that people need to understand. And, that was controversial because that's a really hard one for people to grasp, that there are powers that be that actually, it's not just that they won't protect you, they'll actually kill you. That's a pretty far out notion there for a lot of people. And so we really tried to lay the groundwork to show that, the reason that we're bringing this up is because it's actually important for us if we're going to know what we need to do to mobilize in response to it. So we put our attention, we use the information to inform our solutions rather than to stay too long and hard in the gruesome details of what in fact goes on.
I mentioned before that I was involved in martial arts, and I trained and taught in the nonviolent martial art of Aikido for 15 years, and also did karate and Tai Chi. And I know from that experience that the primary imperative that I learned and would teach all of my students for protecting yourself and your loved ones is an immediate, accurate assessment of your reality. So if there's bad news in your reality, it's not going to help you survive to pretend it isn't there or to be ignorant of it. So one of the things that we're trying to do with Thrive is to do it in as gentle and user-friendly a way as possible, but not to shrink back. It was one of the most challenging things for us with our own team as to whether or not we were going to include the information about the depopulation agenda. And a number of the people in our network who advised against it, I had given them the Alex Jones's film The Endgame, which was kind of the first film that I had seen that does a good job of laying out the facts and the history on the whole eugenics and depopulation movement. And so I passed those around, and each person who would suggest that we not put that in the film, when I would ask them if they had actually watched the movie all the way through, the only one who had was Kimberly. And she was the one who agreed with me that we needed to put it in there. And for me, what I would say to them was, if Paul Revere came riding through your town and his horse kind of smelled and his voice was kind of squeaky and stuff, it would be a shame to not pay attention to what he was saying because there were some uncomfortable aspects. The key thing is to know the information so that then you can respond effectively. So that's why we put that in there, because the evidence has only gotten stronger to me over the years, supporting the fact that there is an agenda by these people who not only want to control, but are willing to destroy, not even just willing, but relative to the topic we were just discussing, they actually get off on the process of inflicting suffering on other people. And that's a serious aspect of our reality to get an accurate assessment of.
Thank you.
And thank you, Jules. One of the enabling areas that will help us to break free of the elite's grip is the liberation of free energy technologies. Uranus Rising has a question on this topic.
Yes, whilst watching the part in the movie that showed an image of a small village in an undeveloped country that had a free energy device, I recalled my own experience of living in an undeveloped country. Yes, free energy would have done a lot of help to help those people, but other factors that were actually greater sources of suffering, ones that can't be addressed by free energy, included international political and economic injustices, land ownership injustices, lack of clean drinking water due to pollution of the aquifers, and more. Why do you see technology and free energy as a cure to such world problems? How do you see that technology addresses human problems such as greed, the quest for power, differing viewpoints that lead to conflict, or even generational traumas and suffering?
Well, there's something that we introduce in the movie in the solutions section, and when we're talking about the website, called the Sector Navigator, that we mentioned a little bit earlier in this conversation, where we have the 12 spheres around one, with worldview at the center and then all of the sectors around the outside. And one of the reasons why we keep emphasizing that model is that when we come to an issue like free energy technology, rather than considering it on its own, hopefully we can see it in the light of a whole system which includes the other sectors as well. Because one thing that we're absolutely not proposing is that technology is going to handle our evolution. It can be a very useful tool, but ultimately it itself is neutral. In terms of greed and conflict, if you have plenty of energy to go around, there's probably going to be less fighting over fossil fuels and that type of thing. So it can be a tremendous assistance in providing access to energy and having heat and being able to cook food and run the pump that'll bring up pressure water and that type of thing. But it's not an answer to everything unto itself. So looking from the point of view of the Sector Navigator, the free energy device might fall into the area of science. It certainly can affect areas of health and economics, but also it's important to recognize the other areas surrounding it, like ecology. That as we're addressing certain areas with an instrument, we also need to be addressing the other areas, especially with the most important instrument of all, which is human consciousness, both the mind and the heart, that needs to evolve in order to align itself consciously with the path of our own evolution, because technology clearly won't ever do it for us. In fact, the reason we're at the critical fork in the road we're at right now is that the technology that we have developed has a destructive capacity that is so far ahead of the general consciousness of civilization that we're at risk of destroying life as we know it on the planet. So I see them as needing to go forward hand in hand, and hopefully the Sector Navigator and the multiplicity of self-creating solutions that we and others are recommending can just encourage a conversation where people from these various sectors are all interacting in a synergetic way. And the last thing I'll say about that is one of the most encouraging things to me about the opportunity to be involved in a global conversation, as I've been able to be for the last month, is that virtually every interview that I've had a chance to participate in, like this one, some of them are groups that are particularly focused on conspiracy. Others are focused on economics. Others are focused on UFOs. Others are focused on consciousness or liberty. But I would say that there hasn't been a single interview that I've been involved in yet where there wasn't really quite a generalized awareness of the group, even if they had a particular topic interest to their community, that there is a really rapidly growing generalized awareness bridging these different areas and tying them together into synergetic thinking and synergetic activism. It's one of the most hopeful things that I've ever seen.
Well, yes, I think we have to look in holistic terms and, start coming from the big picture and not expect one little section to solve all the problems. So I appreciate your answer, and thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We did say on that how much to include and how much not to. But the movie was obviously part of why it took 8 years, was to mostly get rid of stuff that we were trying, to figure out whether or not to include. But anyway, by using the sector navigator and thinking holistically, part of what that did is we said, the thing about free energy is that it's not just a technology, it's a paradigm. Because when you realize that the universe is abundant, that shifts not just the potential for our technology, but for how we relate to one another. Because the whole scarcity paradigm that if you have it, I won't, and if I have it, you can't, goes away when you realize that we're all connected and it's an infinitely abundant universe. So part of our choice in choosing to include that was that it had such broad ramifications, and also because one of the ways that I believe the agenda has been able to get so far is to keep people so disempowered and so focused on survival that they don't have time to do the level of inquiry or even creative problem solving that they could otherwise. And often energy access is a bottleneck to that kind of time. So that was it, but it was in no way meant to supplant the importance of consciousness or ecology, or like you say, any of these other things that need to work in tandem with the free energy.
Yes, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And thank you, Uranus. Shifting to a different area, economics and governance are tightly interwoven into the elite's control grid. I have a question for you in this area. Post-Thrive movie release, in both the Worldwide Tipping Point interview as well as in your interview with Catherine Austin Fitz on Solari, the money factor was brought into your conversation, but not in any great depth. Given that Catherine is a money-oriented person, I thought it was kind of strange that it didn't naturally flow out of that. In the Solari interview, you did state, at the core of the whole scam is the central banking system and fractional reserve scam. As Amschel Meyer Rothschild is quoted to have said, permit me to issue and control the money of a nation, and I care not who makes its laws. And similarly, President James Garfield is quoted as also having said, whoever controls the volume of money in any country is the absolute master of all industry and commerce. The money cartel and central banks and the BIS/IMF as central banks to the central banks appear to me at least to be the linchpin of power and control. Since the politicians of the indistinguishable red team, blue team are dependent on the primary dealer banks, and that the central banks integrate in that in order to fund government operations, why would a politician ever vote or move to dismember or end the Fed or nationalize it and then shift those functions over inside the Treasury or to the comptroller of the currency? How do we change and fix the money paradigm?
Well, I think it's a great question about what politicians would vote for it. It would take a tremendous level of both understanding and integrity. In the case of somebody like Ron Paul, you've seen it for 30 years. Dennis Kucinich has caught on more recently. He's had the integrity but not the understanding until recently, I believe, and now he's spoken out about in favor of ending the Fed. But most of the politicians either don't understand the system. I've known a number of senators and congresspeople myself, and I have been shocked at their lack of understanding of economics, and of a true liberty system. But how to actually change that system, I think that the key is at the root of it. It's based on something which is not aligned with truth or with natural principles, which is that a few individuals are separated from other human beings and given a power that other human beings don't have. And from that builds a cancerous system. And the powers that they're given are, one, the power to tax, and two, the power to create money whenever they want. In the case of the government, the first time, and the central bankers the second time. And then finally, back to the government, they're given a monopoly on force. And that's the dangerous combination. When a small group of people gets to set the rules, make up money, and then have the strongest force around, they can basically do whatever they want to other people as long as they can do it gradually enough that they're not overthrown by a revolution. And so the key, I think, is not to create a violent revolution, because they have most of the money and virtually all the military force at this point, but to have a decentralized movement, like I described before, of withdrawing our participation from each of those systems, from the income tax system, from the willingness to have a private central bank telling everybody else how much money is going to be in the system, and also from having a small group of people having the only organized force. And the key to me in the whole transition is, in a single word, it's voluntary. That's my kind of true north. Well, that's the compass I hold up to a system. And you look at our Federal Reserve System, the fractional reserve system, and you think, okay, is this system voluntary? No, you actually have to use Federal Reserve notes, and you have to go along with what the Federal Reserve says the interest rates are going to be, and you have to pay income tax that someone else decides, whether you like it or not, under threat of violence. So imagine if the entire system was voluntary. If you had anybody could make up any currency they want. Some currencies are actually backed by solid commodities or minerals or whatever, and you can be guaranteed of exchanging your notes for that anytime you want. And then you have another currency down the street that you can also use that is backed by nothing. Which currency are you going to use? How long is that one down the street that somebody just made up? It's not going to last, except in a system where the state is dominating everyone else by that monopoly on force. So suppose rather than having any centralized monopoly on force, you had private security companies that would have to be insured by private insurance companies that would have to keep evaluating what is the reputation of this security company for not violating anybody's rights, but instead protecting them. That's the world that we're heading toward, and it's not a way that people are used to thinking at all. But to get to the root of the problem, to me, it's going back into the money and back into the system of governance and saying, okay, if we're going to agree not to violate anybody, then let's make sure that every single system is voluntary. As long as nobody is violating someone else's person or property or privacy, then people are free to do what they want. They're free to exchange as they want. They're free to hire the protection they want, but not to violate someone else simply to protect their own rights.
And if we can get some honest politicians in, we might be able to evolve to an honest money system. They really do have quite a control grid set up. And speaking of the intricate control grid and domination agenda that won't be dismantled overnight, Uranus Rising has a question on timing, what to do, and when.
Foster, in the movie and on your website, you have put forward the suggestion of a 3-phased overlapping plan of solutions. As you said in the film, you can't build a just system on top of an unjust one. It seems to me that we would need a period of time for people to become informed, to awaken to all that you have put forward in the film, to the necessary critical mass, but also implement these phases. These are very noble visions and goals, and I would think these would appeal to most people. But there are other people who feel a profound urgency is upon us now, especially with the financial and market woes in the U.S. and around the world, severe weather and terrestrial events, peak oil, and more. My questions are, what time frame do you see for this movement to gain traction and be fulfilled? What kind of time frame do you expect for the solutions to be implemented? Do we have time? And if we don't, what?
Well, I have a tremendous confidence in the life force itself. And I see the planetary immune system kicking in. I see people accessing their creativity and organizing synergistically in ways that even I hadn't been able to imagine. I see things moving more rapidly than I had even estimated that they could. So I'm not Pollyannish about the transition, and at the same time, I'm feeling very confident that the old system really is sloughing off like an exoskeleton. Often it's like an egg crack. We're just growing beyond it, and I'm doing everything I can, as is Kimberly, to make that transition as comfortable and nonviolent as possible. And I am so encouraged by things that I had kind of asked the universe for in my deeper moments, but I wasn't necessarily expecting or so quickly. And two examples of that are Occupy and Anonymous. We've got a section in our film and on the website where we talk about the importance of critical mass action. And that's a particular strategy where people sign up for a movement, and then the action happens when there's a critical mass ready to go. Now, that strategy wasn't part of Occupy. That was just masses of people coming together. But it's shown me, even more than I knew before, how rapidly an idea whose time has come can spread in people's lives and show up in action. And then my main concern after that was, can we keep the Internet open long enough to use it as the tool that's needed to cross this tipping point? And then Occupy shows up. And I remember sitting at my desk when somebody sent me the trailer for when Occupy actually came out. Anonymous came out vocally. And I watched that trailer, and I just cried at my desk with just happiness, because I had hoped that there would be an independent, decentralized network of brilliant computer whizzes who would protect the Internet and protect the truth getting told around the world. And then Anonymous shows up. And, by the way, they have contacted us through other people and let us know that they love our project and have our back, which feels good, because that's not my specialty. And with the Internet open, I'm tremendously confident. So I'm going to, I usually don't get into predictions much, but I was really intrigued by your question to think about, okay, well, what sort of patterns of unfoldment of time can I imagine? So it'll be interesting to check back on this in a few years and see. But my assumptions are based on that we keep the Internet open. So when I look at, okay, what kind of time is it going to take? One vision that I've had is 2 presidential terms for the movement into stage 1 and then stage 2. And I'm not backing any particular candidate, but as a symbol of this kind of metaphor, I've been envisioning a political ticket made up of Ron Paul and Dennis Kucinich. So you've got the traditional Democrat Republicans represented, but both people are very brilliant, very knowledgeable, and have tremendous integrity. And in our solution strategy, stage 1 is primarily about restoring integrity to the systems while taking care of the people who've been most damaged and most disenfranchised by the system, with monies that are made available not through creating new violations, new taxations, but through cutting the military budget in half and getting rid of the interest on the Federal Reserve, getting rid of the Federal Reserve. So that frees up literally trillions of dollars a year, which would easily fund the health care for those who can't afford it, a transition to organic gardening. Then we stop these wars of aggression, and there's a lot of money available for a transition. It's almost like healing the body, where you take energy from healthy parts of the body and you can increase the blood flow to where the cuts and bruises are to heal the wholeness of it. And I think that Ron Paul is very expert in the integrity of the system. So as a symbol, he and Rand and a few others are very aware of the problems with the economic system and aware of the importance of shrinking government and really restoring human liberty. whereas Dennis Kucinich, I've had the privilege to talk with him a few times about some of these issues, and I think that he's very much attuned to the more traditional social democrat agenda of how do we use general funds to take care of people most in need. And ultimately, in the long run, I think that that's not a workable or sustainable system. But in the meantime, while people are transitioning, rather than throwing people off the cliff who are dependent on that system, I think the key thing is to keep the goal in mind of absolute freedom, not create any new violations along the way, and then use the funds that are freed up by creating a more honest system to take care of those people in transition. And I think he would be effective at that. So let's say, for example, let's say Ron Paul was president and Dennis was vice president for 4 years, and then the next 4 years they switch. And meanwhile, they're each doing what they're good at with integrity. And then so that's 2 terms, and then in the third term, you'd be really winding down ideally, the other systems had been put in place with independent currencies and security systems and insurance systems. The dissolving of nation states had been shown to be so effective that it would be clear if any of that needed to be kept in place. But ideally, we'd be moving into a truly voluntary but really just society based on the protection of individual rights. So I think in a really ideal scenario, we see the tipping point. Basically, 2012 is the year of exposing what's really going on through things like Thrive and a lot of other media and programs like your own that are spreading like wildfire. A tipping point of the population will be awakened by the end of 2012. I'm quite confident. And then in the years following that, I think that the first 4 years is very much going to be about restoring integrity to the current systems, and meanwhile moving toward the shrinking of government, which will be the next 4 years, and then the 4 years after that will be really clarifying how do we operate our educational systems and our roads and our healthcare and so forth, in a voluntary system. So I can actually see us crossing the tipping point of awareness and action within the next year to two, and actually being very solidly ensconced in that transformation in the 8 years following that, and then in the 4 after that we would be already reveling in the health and prosperity and just the freedom and security of a voluntary system. That may be very optimistic, but the more I see how rapidly things are changing with the internet technologies and with the way that particularly the youngest generation now is looking to think outside of the box, I think that that's actually possible.
Thank you, Foster. That was much appreciated, and it was a really, really revealing answer you gave. I have one last question for you. Thrive is directed at those generally unaware versus what we call the woo-woo realm, those who are well aware of what is going on. Are there plans for a sequel to expand on, explore these topics in greater depth to address those who are more aware of what's going on?
Well, let me clarify the question a little bit. What is it that you are saying that you would want to see in the sequel?
Well, more looking in depth, I think that would be, and more of on a spiritual realm, yes, perhaps, or more going off into the outer dimensions of the 12 vectors. But we just kind of think that maybe because you're starting at the beginning, you're addressing the movie for the generally unaware, which is appropriate, very appropriate at this time. But we're wondering if maybe you might have a sequel that you can go more in depth with all of these issues at a later date. Have you considered that?
Well, it's a little bit like asking a woman who's just delivered a baby, whether she wants to be pregnant again. So it's a challenging time for us to even consider doing another film, because this has been 8 years of 15-hour days, and we're ready for a change of pace, not of where we're putting our attention, but the pace at which we're doing it. And so we're realistically not planning a sequel of this level of complexity and production value and expense and so forth. What we are really interested in is continuing to create media that, as I said in the very beginning, that the mission of Clear Compass is to create compelling media that assists humanity in thriving through the evolutionary challenges threatening our survival. That we're going to be continuing to do. And what I personally am most interested in is, now that kind of the basic information is out there, what I'm most interested in is the strategic think tanks to plan very grounded transition strategies along the lines of the solutions that we've suggested. So I think the media that we're going to be doing is more filming critical think tanks, bringing together thought leaders who are focusing not so much on whistleblowing, but on how to create the transition to a just and free world, a healthy world, and then either live streaming those or editing those down to a very succinct but very rich conversation, and then putting those out on the internet, particularly with the emphasis on, like you're saying, number one for us is to really elucidate the ethics of the whole thing, and that really comes back to the liberty perspective, which I find is very, very new to most people, to have really thought through what is the core ethic and how can we have systems that don't violate that. And that, to me, is the gateway of opening up what you're talking about the further reaches of the spiritual realm. Because to me, and I talk about this on the website, and one of our sectors is spirituality. And in my experience, spirituality is not something that we have to go find somewhere else or learn from someone else or take on some set of beliefs or something like that, but it's who we are in our essence. And as we get good at relaxing our body and letting our emotions flow responsibly, and both opening our mind and learning to focus our mind, and learning to get good at resolving conflict with other people and living in harmony with our environment. When we get good at those 5 things, our spiritual nature can really come out and blossom and play and interact with other people. And I really see a whole spiritual emergence going on the planet right now as we're just beginning to get good at those things. And also in my personal experience, as we clear ourselves in those ways, there are gateways that open up in our own consciousness that begin to access other realms of consciousness, other vibrational frequencies and harmonic resonances, where there are whole cultures of intelligent entities. They're waiting to greet us with loving and open arms, and they're already in support of us, but for a lot of people, they are unaware of our connections on those other levels. And then on a slightly more practical, but also very far-out level, Jacques Vallée, one of the primary ET researchers, has said that in his research, over 80% of the ET contact that's going on is telepathic. Very small percentage of it is actually some sort of, metallic-looking ships that materialize and then fly around and that kind of stuff. So I think that as we discover our spiritual natures, we're naturally going to realize our already existing connection with entities at all different levels. And as we invite in the ones that are healthy and nurturing and learn to avoid the other ones, I just see a whole release of love and freedom and creativity on this planet beyond anything we can imagine right now. And I'm as excited about that, and maybe more so than any of the rest of it. But we've got some work to do as we're going that direction.
Well, again, your answer is very revealing, and I appreciate it very much, Foster. Thank you. And I won't bother you about a new baby too quick.
We'll keep you posted.
Great. Thank you, Uranus. We have been speaking with Foster and Kimberly Gamble of ThriveMovement.com. Thank you for sharing your time and thoughts with us today. We hope the listeners have gained insights into the topics we've been discussing, and we hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. If you didn't, you must not have paid attention to our no refunds, no exchanges policy, where we clearly state that all sales are final, for we are the Time Monk Radio Network. We can't recapture time not well spent. Rather, we are forward-looking, and we believe the past is for historians, as long as its history lessons have been learned. Instead, we'll keep our eyes looking for what the future may hold. On behalf of Fox and all the members of the Time Monk Radio Network, thank you, Foster and Kimberly. And in our tradition, may you and yours have many tasty pies to come.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure to be with the Time Monks for this conversation. It's very inspiring, and I look forward to future ones.
And I just want to say how much I've appreciated this. I think it's been a fabulous call with you, and I'm encouraged by the thoughtfulness of your questions, and I'm grateful to have participated. Look forward to talking again.
Thank you, Kimberly.
Thanks, Kimberly.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Foster.
Thank you, Foster.
Thank you,
You are
Foster.
Yeah, thank you, Foster. You've inspired wonderful questions.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure. I'll see you on down the road.